like water seeping through an earthen dam to get around the plain words of immigration law to advance their clients' interests, Sessions said. Adding, the same happens in criminal courts, and we understand that. Their duty, however, is not to uphold the integrity of the act. That's our duty. So right there, here's an editorial aside. His whole point of view, and the whole point of view of so many people here, is that immigrants are trying to do something to us. They're trying to get away with something, trying to avoid something, trying to move around. And that's the whole point that I was just trying to make. The system creates a series of steps, and then when you don't follow that series of steps, it's like, oh, you're breaking the system. But you created the steps. If you just remove those steps, if you just say, okay, you know, there's too many steps here. There's 15 steps for you to get from there to there. We're going to take 10 of those out. There'll be 5 steps. We'll do it in 5. Suddenly, it would be a lot easier. It wouldn't be that big a deal. But because there are so many steps, it becomes this onerous process, and a lot of people don't have the time, they don't have the money, they don't have whatever to deal with that, and it becomes this big deal when they don't go through all those steps. So, okay. To continue, Sessions noted that, of course, the system must always respect the rights of aliens in the courts, but he also warned the judges of fake claims. Quote, just as we defend immigrant legal rights, we reject unjustified and sometimes fake claims, Sessions said. The law is never serviced when deceit is rewarded so that the fundamental principles of the law are defeated. The comments came in the context of Sessions' repeated moves to exert his unique authority over the immigration courts, a separate legal system for immigrants that is entirely run by the Justice Department. Sessions approves every judge hired and can instruct them on how to interpret the law, and thus decide cases, as well as how to manage cases. He has used that authority multiple times in the past year, including issuing a sweeping ruling that will substantially narrow the types of cases that qualify for asylum protections in the U.S. Those decisions overrode the evolution of years of immigration judges and the immigration appellate court's decisions. Sessions reminded the new judges that the authority of and those decisions in his remarks, saying, let me try that again. Sessions reminded the new judges of that authority and those decisions in his remarks, saying he believed they are correct and prudent interpretations of the law that restores them to the original intent. The president of the Union for Immigration Judges called Sessions' comments really troubling and problematic, noting that the judges' union has disagreed with many of Sessions' moves as exerting too much influence over the courts and jeopardizing their fundamental responsibility of fairness. Quote, we just find it really troubling and problematic that the AG just does not seem to appreciate the distinction that we have as immigration judges from the rest of the department, both the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Department of Homeland Security, said Ashley Tabador of the National Association of Immigration Judges. We are not one and the same as them. In the immigration court system, the judges are employed by the Justice Department, and the attorneys serving as prosecutors work for the Department of Homeland Security. Immigrants are allowed to have lawyers if they can find them, but none are provided to them. Sessions said it was a joint duty for the courts to follow his interpretation of the law. He noted an increase in asylum claims made by immigrants crossing the southern border, which has created a years-long backlog in the resource-strained immigration courts. Quote, the asylum system has been abused for years, we all know that, to the detriment of the rule of law, sound public policy, public safety, and to the detriment of people with legitimate claims. This is Sessions speaking. Asylum was never meant to provide escape from all the problems, even serious problems, that people face every day around the world. Indeed, Americans face serious problems every day. Sessions added that when we depart from the law and create nebulous standards, that does violence to the rule of law. I mean, think about this stuff. Okay. The Trump administration argues the backlog is because of fake claims gumming up the system, although it has presented no evidence that intentionally fraudulent cases are more than a minuscule fraction of the total. Tabador and the Judges Union have long been pushing for the courts to be taken out of the Department of Justice and set up as an independent system, similar to the bankruptcy court. Tabador has served as an immigration judge since 2005. While other administrations have sought to influence the courts in some ways, like how to prioritize cases, she said judges have not witnessed anything like this administration under Sessions. We have never really seen the level of explicit and deep sort of scrutiny and use of the court consistent with the executive branch's political policies, Tabador said. According to Justice statistics, roughly 22% of asylum cases were granted this year through June, but not all of the rest were denials. Roughly 42% were denied in the same time frame, and others were simply closed. Research has shown that immigrants with access to lawyers to guide them through the complex system were much more likely to win their asylum claims. Sessions also referenced the zero-tolerance policy implemented this spring that resulted in thousands of families' separations at the border. The Justice Department prosecutes the cases that are referred to it, a policy still in effect. Sessions said 90% of cases being referred to justice are being prosecuted, but he did not acknowledge the family separations that occurred or the fact that the Department of Homeland Security has stopped referring the cases of parents caught crossing illegally with their children in order to no longer separate families. Quote, listen to this, "I think it has some deterrent effect. We have history to show us that this is so," Sessions said. However, there has been no marked drop in the number of families crossing the border since the policy went into effect, and crossings in general have largely fluctuated with seasonal trends. Sessions was speaking to 44 judges being trained and brought on board. That is the largest class of immigration judges ever, and it means the system now has the most active immigration judges in history. He said more are scheduled to be added by the end of the year, putting them close to their goal of a 50% increase in the number of immigration judges since the beginning of the administration. So it's hard to read stories about Jeff Sessions because that name Sessions, it's just hard to say it over and over and over again like that. And it's also hard to read it because it's really frustrating to listen to the stuff he says and that interpretation, that attitude that immigrants are attacking us in some way. They're coming here trying to get something. It's like they're coming in like shoplifters coming into the store trying to take stuff. So we have to be on guard. So we need guards at the door to let only a couple of them in at a time. And then you have to watch them while they're walking around the store to make sure they're not filling their pockets with stuff. And then you have to count all their stuff very carefully at the checkout lane because they're going to try and sneak something by you. I mean, if you were a business and you treated your customers like that, you wouldn't have very many customers for very long. But because this is a country and we're treating our immigrants like that, we're getting away with it to a great extent because most people are not aware that this is going on. They don't pay attention to the news. And it's very frustrating. With this glut of information that we have, it's surprising how few people still know what's happening in the world, much less in their own country, much less in their own state, city, block, whatever. It's like we see news as entertainment, I think. And people watch the news and they're going, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of interesting. Whoa, what's that? And they don't see a picture created by all these different things. They don't follow the narrative. They just go from whatever strikes them as interesting. They grumble a little bit about something, and then they go on and watch some other entertainment show, and they miss any sense of what any of this stuff means. So the number of people that actually know how our justice system is treating the immigrants that come here and why is relatively few. And if you listen to the show, you're going to know more than probably 80, 90% of the people in this country, just because we're bothering to follow these stories and pay attention to them and to some extent explain them to you. And so that's a good thing. It's a good thing that you follow this and you are paying attention, because if you don't know it, then you can't do anything about it. And that's always a big problem, of course, because we live here in this small community. Most of the decisions being made about the treatment of immigrants are being made in Washington, D.C. by people who were elected or appointed, but not necessarily in reflection of the views of the majority of people in this country. So I know this has been said before, and it will be said again many times, but our electoral system is not really all that fair. And there are not really all that many people that participate in it. So when you're talking about someone winning the election, you're talking about only roughly maybe slightly over a third of the people in this country. I think it's some number like that. Something over a third, maybe a third to half of the people in the country bothering to vote at all. People who are eligible to vote. So almost half the people that are eligible to vote don't. So, and of course, not everybody who's in the country, who lives here, who's affected by what happens here, is eligible to vote. So a lot of them are too young. We have a lot of people with their voting rights taken away because they've been incarcerated for some reason. We have a lot of people who are visiting here or who are temporary immigrants or whatever. So really, if you counted all the people who live in this country and who are affected by the decisions of this country, it really is down to about a third of those people choosing who gets to make the rules. And then of those third of those people, it's not necessarily who the most people vote for, but who the most people in certain places vote for. So it's been pointed out time and again that because of the Electoral College, people in some states, their vote carries more weight than, say, 100 or even 1,000 people in another state because of that system. So really, and because of gerrymandering on top of that, you have a lot of people that are elected not by the majority of voters anyway. Again, no electrical. The Electoral College, no, we're not talking Electoral College here, but just the voting. Someone is running for a district, but that district is carved up in a way so that the most people who are liable to vote for that party are in it, and so they are elected ostensibly as representative of that district, but this district next to it may be larger, but it's chopped up in a way that, the district isn't larger, it's not chopped up, but it's diluted with different voters so that because of how these things are combined, a certain party, whoever gets to draw those districts, tends to somehow magically get more of their people elected, sometimes even than they have voters who are voting for them. And so this has been the case for several years now, several elections now, and Republicans have managed to dominate the redistricting in many states, and therefore I believe, I don't have percentages, but I know that the majority of voters voted for Democrats in the last election, but the majority of people who won were Republicans because of that thing. And we all know the whole popular vote going to the Democratic candidate in the last presidential election, but because of the Electoral College, the candidate with less votes won. So the people that are making these decisions are not representative of the majority of people who are affected by them. And that is something to remember, because when you say, oh, the American people must approve of this because they elect these people and they knew that that's what these people were intending to do. But that's not how it happens. So it's a complicated process. And in this instance, right now, we have people creating statutes, writing laws, giving orders, and basically creating an attitude towards immigrants that were not elected by the majority of people in the country. They do not represent the majority of people in the country. They just represent the power at this time. So if you want to change that, that's something you can do locally, is vote based around what you know the parties represent. Because there's a lot of people who will say, well, I am X party, but my beliefs are different from theirs. And yet when they go to Washington, they end up voting with their party. So sadly, it doesn't help much to vote for the individual in too many cases these days. It may, at one time it probably did, but it doesn't so much anymore. Now you have to really think about their party, because people are, the partisanship divide is really strong, and the parties are very much almost diametrically opposed on some issues. And so you have to think, do you believe this way or this way? And if you believe this way, then you vote for these people even if you don't like them, versus these people even if you kind of like them, but they're pushing the other way. And it's a really sad state of affairs. I wish we had a different system here. And I think it's worth pursuing, but at this time it's just a battle to try to keep some sort of sanity, I guess you might call it, in our system. I don't know. Anyway, let me read another story to follow up on that last one. This one's entitled, "In Immigration Courts, It's Judges versus Justice Department." It's kind of connected to the one I just read. So, as the Trump administration pursues a hardline policy on immigration, it is facing resistance from an unexpected quarter: judges who rule on whether immigrants will be deported or be allowed to stay in the country. Immigration judges are objecting to a series of policy and personnel changes that their bosses at the Justice Department say are aimed at speeding up the immigration courts, which as of the end of June had a backlog of 732,730 cases, 94,871 of them in New York, according to the department's Executive Office for Immigration Review. Some judges, including those in the New York courts, interpret the new policies, which include quotas on how many cases they must hear, as an attempt to control their decision-making. There has been so much focus on efficiency and speeding up the process, said New York Judge Amenia Khan, speaking as the executive vice president of the National Association of Immigration Judges, the Judges Union. To the union, she said, the changes seem like an attempt to turn judges from neutral arbiters into law enforcement agents enacting Trump administration policies, which is exactly what you would have seen from the last article and this one, and lately what they've been trying to do. In a statement, a Justice Department spokesman called the changes a series of common-sense reforms that will realign the agency towards completing cases, increasing both productivity and capacity, and changing policies that lead to inefficiencies and waste. The union is currently renegotiating its contract with the Justice Department. New York's immigration judges have long taken an independent line. While nationally, judges granted asylum to about 47% of immigrants from the 2012 fiscal year to 2017, according to statistics from the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. Whoa. A research judge at Syracuse University. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try that again. That was a weird reading. I'll start again. New York's immigration judges have long taken an independent line, while nationally, judges granted asylum to about 47% of immigrants from the 2012 fiscal year to 2017, according to statistics from the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, a research group at Syracuse University. The approval rate was nearly 83% among New York's judges during that same time period. Sitting judges are prohibited from speaking directly about issues that could be seen as political, but retired judges are not. And Margaret McManus, 67, who left the New York Immigration Court after 27 years at the end of 2017, said, "I must say it was not a very nice year." That's a pretty mild statement. Before the Trump administration, there would be changes in policy, but not so dramatic, she said. They never told us what to do with the case. Do the case. It wasn't outcome-oriented. Immigration judges are appointed by the Attorney General and are part of the Justice Department. They are not technically an independent judiciary. The judges have long said that they are deciding the fates of immigrants in a traffic court setting. They wear robes but do not have gavels. Instead, they pound date stamps on the pages of filings that come across their desk. That's me pounding a stamp. In April, they were rattled when the Justice Department began requiring them to provide a detailed itinerary of upcoming foreign travel, car rental agencies, hotels, and names of foreign nationals they were visiting in order to maintain their security clearance. Although all executive branch employees with security clearances were required to submit the new information, the judges found it invasive, said Los Angeles Judge Ashley Tabador, speaking as the president of the union. Other changes have been more substantive. In June, Attorney General Jeff Sessions issued a ruling making it more difficult for victims of domestic violence or gang violence to make asylum claims. He also limited judges' ability to put cases aside, for instance, while an immigrant sought legal status another way, such as by applying for a green card. After a Philadelphia judge, Stephen A. Morley, postponed a case because he thought the immigrant had not received proper notification, the Justice Department in July reassigned all of his 87 similar cases, saying it had reason to believe he had committed potential violations of law and policy. The union filed a grievance, arguing the government was trying to influence the outcome of the case. Then, in August, Mr. Sessions declared that if judges saw it necessary to postpone a hearing, as they had in the past, for instance, to give a lawyer more time to prepare, they had to show good cause. David Martin, a professor emeritus of law at the University of Virginia and a former lawyer for the Department of Homeland Security, said he understood the government's perspective. He said immigration lawyers have used postponements to string things out, on the theory that the longer immigrants are in the country, the harder it is to deport them. But what has upset judges the most is that beginning October 1st, they will have to meet a quota of 700 cases completed a year, or they could be fired. To complete a case, they must let an immigrant stay in the country legally, issue a removal order, or terminate the case because the immigrant's status had changed. They could get negative performance reviews if 15% of their decisions get overturned on appeal. The Justice Department said that from 2011 to 2016, judges completed an average of 678 cases per year. Judges are being monitored on the performance dashboard on their court's computers, which indicates if they are keeping up their pace. Judge Tabador called the new policies huge psychological warfare and said judges were being pushed to move faster at the expense of denying immigrants their rights in court. In testimony to the Senate in April, Ms. Tabador said the union also wants to reduce the backlog of pending cases, in part by hiring new judges. It wants an increased budget and more administrative assistance. One day last month, Judge Khan was plowing through 56 cases for her morning docket. She was scheduling asylum hearings for fall 2021, saying perhaps they could be moved up if we get additional resources. So far, it's hard to say whether the changes have affected immigrants in the New York courts. One Brooklyn nonprofit, Central American Legal Assistance, said that after Mr. Sessions' asylum ruling in June, New York judges still granted asylum in 15 out of 20 cases. Lawyers reframed cases by arguing that their clients, for example, were witnesses to crimes or were persecuted because of family ties to either the police or organized crime. You can't just end asylum, said Heather Axford, a lawyer for the Brooklyn nonprofit. In fact, she said, in ruling to restrict asylum, Mr. Sessions had increased the backlog because lawyers are making more specific arguments that cause other cases to be postponed. Cases that would have taken 2 hours now take 5 hours, Ms. Axford said. Across the country, there has been a rash of retirements of immigration judges. In New York alone, 5 retired in the last 15 months, including Judge McManus and George T. Chu, a 22-year veteran who warned younger judges to dispense mercy with justice at his going-away party. As part of its efforts to speed up the courts, the Justice Department added 4 New York judges, bringing the total to 30. Another 3 start next month, and new courtrooms are being built. Overseeing them will be the new presiding judge, Daniel J. Daugherty, a former chief trial judge for the Navy and a Marine Corps veteran who still sits on the bench in Los Angeles. Judge Daugherty has an 86.5% denial rate of asylum claims, which made him the most lenient of the 4 judges in Las Vegas, according to the Syracuse Research Group. He runs a very dignified courtroom, said Michael Kagan, the head of the immigration clinic at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. But Sarah Burr, a retired judge who was the supervising judge in New York until 2012, said Judge Daugherty's appointment seemed by design. I think it's absolutely a signal to the New York judges to adhere faithfully to what the Attorney General's program is, she said. Okay, I don't have time to go on. I had a couple more things I was going to read, but I'm out of time. I talk too much. That's what I'm here for, though. I'm supposed to talk too much, or not too much, but I'm supposed to talk enough, anyway, to fill the time and to hopefully give you something of value to think about. I realize that some of my rambling was kind of random rambling there for a while, but sometimes it's you've got an idea, a point you're trying to get at, and it's just you're sort of wandering around it trying to figure out where it is. You know, kind of by feel the general area where it is, but you don't really have a clear sense, and getting there can be difficult. Or at least that's how it is for me. I don't know how it is for you when you sit down and talk for an hour about something, but that's how it is for me. Sometimes I go right to the point. Sometimes I wander around it for a long period of time. But that's what you get here on CU Immigration. I hope there's been some content worthy of thought and gave you something to think about, something to consider. We will be back next week, perhaps, or not, as the case may be. Who knows? But I'll be back at some point. In any event, I appreciate you listening. Please tune in again. And as always, you can watch on UPTV on, I believe it's Friday nights. You can always find us on YouTube. And we're always around. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.